when technology doesn't stop. So, what snapshot did that remind you of when you think of Peter? What's that? And why did the rooster, what was the occasion? He was denying that he knew who Jesus was, right? That's the last snapshot that we looked at, and we want to look at another snapshot of Peter. And in order to better understand what it means to be a follower of Jesus today. But have you ever wondered what Peter thought every time he heard a rooster crow from that day forward? What do you think he thought? What's that? He denied him, right? So he thought of that hardness of that day, right? And you said he felt bad, okay? So that would have brought that hard, wish that never happened kind of day to his mind every time he heard that rooster crow. How often do roosters crow? Right? So if you live near one, it's too much. But have you ever thought this, and I wonder this, did Peter maybe, when he heard that rooster crow, did it work in his heart, in his mind, in his soul to the point where he would be maybe more determined that he would never deny Jesus ever again? There would be that constant reminder when he heard that rooster crow, I'm not going there anymore. I am never going to deny him ever again. How many of you have a rooster in your neighborhood? Yeah, some of you have them in your yard, right? Okay. So most of us have a rooster nearby, okay? What if you did this? What if every time a rooster crowed, it reminded you of your need to love Jesus? And it reminded you of his love for you. What's that? You have a crowless rooster. Wow. Some would be, I've never seen that, and I thought, well, maybe some people would put a muzzle on one, and I don't know if that would even work. But I thought most of us hear a rooster in the midst of every day, and what if we did just that? Allowed it to minister to us like it probably or got into our soul a little bit to say, am I loving you, Lord? Am I denying you today? And reinforcing our heart to love him and to live for him. And to allow it to remind us of his love for us. I also think that when Peter heard the rooster crow, he probably remembered the Lord's gaze. Because the Lord looked, according to Luke chapter 22 and verse 61, after the rooster crowed, the Lord looked straight at Peter. And how would Peter know that the Lord looked straight at Peter? Well, this is a quiz with last week's message. Remember the sclera, the white part of your eye that Matt talked about? And that white part of our eye in with our iris and our pupil in the center allows us to know where people are looking. Something unique about human beings. We know where our focus is, and Matt spoke about that last week. And so at that very moment, Peter, without a shadow of a doubt, knew that the Lord was looking right at him, which to me is quite astounding. Because what's happening when the Lord's looking at him? What's happening to the Lord? He's before the high priest. He is being interrogated. He's being questioned. If you read Matthew, he's actually being spit on at this particular time. And he's being falsely accused. And instead of looking downward or looking just at his own self, or instead of looking and focusing on his accusers, where his eyes turn to in the midst of this rooster crowing is right to his disciple Peter, which tells us that his concern at that very moment was not about himself. It wasn't about this thing that is happening in Caiaphas's house where he's being falsely interrogated and accused, and that he's about to bear the sin of the world, but he's looking right at Peter at that instant, which tells me that his concern is for Peter. And I know Matt talked about our focus on God, that our eyes should be focused on him as the author and perfecter of our faith. But it's interesting that his eyes are focused on us. That's where his affection, his love is. It's on Peter at that very moment. So I want us to take a look at the scene. Now we know that the Lord had a concern for Peter. It even came up right after his resurrection. Remember the women in Mark chapter 16 and verse 7. The women who went to the tomb were met by the angel. And the angel said to them, to the women, "Go tell the disciples and Peter that the Lord is risen, and he is going before them into Galilee, and there they will see him." Okay, so he signals out in that whole discourse, the disciples and Peter. The Lord's got Peter on his mind. And that's where I want us to kind of turn for our next snapshot, is in the 21st chapter of John's Gospel. This is the only place you'll find this snapshot of Peter, and it is in Galilee. And we see where this unfolds as the Lord will meet them in Galilee. And I would like to read verses 1 through 19 this morning in beginning. Verses 1 through 19. Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee, and it happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. "I'm going out to fish," Simon Peter told him. And they said, "We'll go with you." And so they went out and they got into the boat, and that night they caught nothing. And early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize it was Jesus. He called out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" "No," they answered. And he said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some." And when they did, they were unable to haul in the net because of the large number of fish. And then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." And as soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and he jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish. And for they were not far from the shore, about 100 yards. And when they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. And Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you have just caught." So Simon Peter climbed back into the boat and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153. But even with so many, the net was not torn. And Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples dared to ask, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. And they came, they took bread. Jesus came and he took bread and he gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the third time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. And when they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." And the second time Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And he answered, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you." And Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." And the third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him a third time, "Do you love me?" And he said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." And very truly I tell you that when you were younger, you dressed yourself and you went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. And Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. And then he said, "Follow me." That's a pretty familiar snapshot to a lot of us. Something that probably on a Good Friday service you might ponder, or the Easter sunrise service. We have pondered that at times. But it's an important snapshot for disciples and followers of Jesus to really grab hold of. And I read that, and it never gets old to me. Not that any scripture really ever gets old, right? But that story always speaks to me. There was one point in my ministry where I did go to Israel. I went to the Sea of Galilee, or Tiberias, the Lake of Tiberias. And in that general vicinity, I stood on the shore, and it's the only picture. I don't like my picture being taken, right? Just don't like it. I don't know. I think probably a lot of us are like that. And this was before iPhones, before all the stuff that Nate talked about a couple of weeks ago, right? And the song that Josiah Queen mentioned. It's so good to go online and hear you guys. It was encouraging. But so I gave my camera to somebody else. It's the only time I would really ever give my camera to. I wanted my picture there on the shore of Galilee because of this passage as a pastor. Because unless I love God, I'm not going to feed you. Unless I'm motivated out of my love for him, and it's greater than my even love for you or anyone else, I can't feed you. It would remind me, and I have that picture in my office, it reminds me of where I need to be in my heart so that I can be your shepherd. I don't know if that makes sense. And it's the only time I've ever asked anyone to take a picture of me. Now, my wife, and anytime we're out in a place, she'll say, "Hey, will you take our picture?" And I just kind of want to go, She just wants to make sure we have record of that. But in this particular picture, I want us sort of to see some significant things. And to begin with, I want to look at some scenery. I want to look at the scene behind it. Because I think some things there help us understand what it means to follow Christ. And you know the story, we just read it, but I want to just highlight a few things from it that we can learn along the way, just from the scene itself. You see, what I pick up in verse 1, afterward Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. Immediately what I'm confronted with, or what comes to mind, is the disciples themselves were obedient to what the angel said. They were obedient to God. They went to Galilee. And just as Jesus had said to them they would see Jesus there. But here's why I say that, because if they weren't obedient, they would not have seen Jesus. And why I say that is because it's out of obedience to God that he meets us. Sometimes we expect him just to show up on a dime in our life, but we're not doing anything to meet him. He meets us in our obedience. And sometimes in our life we're like, well, where is God in the midst of it? And the question is really, where are you in the midst of it? Where are the disciples? Well, they went to Galilee. Now, Nathanael's from Canaan. We know Peter lives there as well. These people, most of his disciples, most of them came from the area of Galilee. This is home turf to them. But they're all together. They're all in a boat. They're looking for something. They haven't dispersed and gone to their homes and gone on with their lives. They are there for a specific reason. And while they're waiting, Peter's not like one just to sit around, right? It's a spring night. It's a good night on the Sea of Galilee. So Peter says, I'm going to go fishing. And 6 of the other disciples decide to join them. So there's 7. There's Nathanael. There's Thomas. He didn't miss out on this one. He was there. He's the twin. That's what Didymus means. And then there's the sons of Zebedee, James and John. They're there. And there's 2 other disciples that we don't know their name of, that they were there on that boat. And they got into this small boat, and they went out that night to fish. And they spent the entire night out fishing. And what did they catch? Nothing, right? We pick up on that real quick. They caught nothing. And I think there's something significant in that. Not just the fact that the first time Jesus meets Peter and John and James and Andrew, they're out fishing all night long, and they catch nothing, and that's when Jesus calls them to be fishers of men. But that's not what I see here. They're out, and they've caught nothing. And Jesus is on shore, and he howls out to them. They're about 100 yards, right, from shore. And friends, and literally in the Greek, it's the word paideia. It means children. Some of your translations will say that. Children, have you any fish? No. Now, Jesus knew this. And I think he gets, at that point, Jesus is about to have some fun. I think that was timing.
Estão me perguntando se eu tô bem e como andam as coisas por aqui. Sinceramente, pai, não respondi ninguém. Na realidade tá tão difícil pra mim. Jesus, não quero contar pra ninguém as coisas que eu só conto pra ti. Mas quando me perguntam se eu tô bem, eu lembro que eu tô pra desistir. E quando me perguntam se está tudo bem, eu lembro quanto está difícil pra poder lutar. E passo um filme aqui das noites sem dormir.
There we go. I thought it was Bluetooth. You know what that was? That was Operation Christmas Child in Spanish. We'll look for it. Wow, what timing was that, huh? I think I was just seeing. What? Yes. That was fun. So, and probably just as surprising to the disciples. Cast your net to the right side of the boat and you'll find some. So they do. They cast their net to the right side of the boat, and the haul of fish was so heavy that they couldn't bring it into the boat like they normally would. They had to drag it behind them. And I thought of a couple things here that in our relationship with God and being followers of him, having faith in him and disciples. Now, at this point, they don't know it's Jesus, but you and I, we do. right? And what it kind of spoke to me as I read that is that obedience and faith go hand in hand. You can't have faith in Jesus without obedience. And why I say that today is because I think that we can think, well, I just believe in Jesus, so therefore he must do all that I want him to do. But it's faith and obedience that go hand in hand. Faith without works, James says in chapter 2, is dead. So faith must also be accompanied by obedience. And they showed that faith and obedience, that trust, by casting their net to the right side of the boat. Now, you and I, they don't know it's Jesus. Now, they're about to. They're about to figure this out just because of what takes place. But for us as followers of him, when we say we have faith in Jesus, it means that we need to be seeking to do his will. And for us to, in order to seek to do his will, well, then we need to know what his will is. And where do we find that? We find it in his word. We need to be in his word. My faith needs to move me to his word so I know how to live this life he calls me to live and live life as a whole, as his disciples. And what it also shows me is that life is a whole lot better with Jesus than without him. Because remember, they're fishing all night long and Jesus isn't there. Jesus shows up and it goes good. Now, I'm not going to say that when Jesus in the midst of our life, everything is just going to be smooth sailing, no pun intended, but it's a whole lot better with him than without him. And if we're obedient to the things he calls us and directs us to do in the midst of it, then as far as what we are doing, we will see his hand at work in our lives. We will see that our labor isn't in vain if we're seeking to do the things that he directs us to do. And that's in ministry, but that's in every area of our lives, whether it be our work, whether it be our families. If we are seeking to do as God directs us, and we can be sure that the labor in our homes are not in vain. And that's a promise that we can take hold of. So I picked that up from just being out in the water and what they just experienced. Now, when they come on shore, what do they find? In verse 9, they find a fire of coals, or a charcoal fire, some translations say. When's the last time that we see a charcoal fire in the Bible? Remember?
He just warming himself by the fire while Jesus is being tried.
Okay, so it's Peter warming himself by a charcoal fire. It's John 18:18. While Jesus is being tried before the high priest, and where Peter denies Jesus, he was warming himself over a charcoal fire. He comes on this beach, and there is a charcoal fire with some fish on it. So this day, and when does he meet Jesus? When does this all take place? It takes place at daybreak, very early in the morning, probably the time when a rooster might crow, right? And there he sees the fire, he sees the smells of the fire, he sees the charcoal, he's getting the warmth of the fire, the fish is on the fire that Jesus put on there. By the way, the Greek there says there's one fish, it's not enough to go around, but there's fish on the fire. And Jesus invites them at that point to have breakfast. And he says, bring some of the fish you've just caught. Now let me rewind a little bit. After they had gotten this net full of fish, John is always faster than Peter. Anywhere you look in the Bible, John is always quicker. All right? John gets it right away because of what just took place, this net full of fish. He says, it's the Lord. And Peter computes, gets it. And what is his response right away? Yeah, he throws on his outer robe because he had taken it off to go fishing, in a work atmosphere, And then he throws himself into the water. Okay, now the word for throw there, or cast, is the word balo in the Greek. It comes from the word balo. I remember that because that's how I help me remember what the word throw in Greek is. Because what do you do with a ball? You throw it. So you throw the balo. Okay? He literally jumps or throws himself into the lake. Okay? From this point forward, there is no denying Jesus for Peter. He is all in, literally, right? So he throws himself into the lake. He throws his garment around him. He girds it up by his sash, and he is on his way. He's only 100 yards from Jesus at this point, but he's 100 yards too much. And he can't wait to be with him. And there's a picture of discipleship. Anything that would separate, any distance at all for any of us from Jesus, we want that distance to not be there. And he rushes to the shore, the first one there to be with his Lord. He wants to be close. And that is a picture of discipleship. I think Matt mentioned it in his message last week. If there's something that is keeping you from your love of Jesus, that you would just do whatever it takes. I think he referred to the iPhone. He said, yeah, just break it. If it's in between you and God, break it. Be with him. And what would a world look like, or what would a world think of a church and followers of Christ that live that kind of life? I don't care what anyone else is thinking. I'm jumping in. I'm going to be with him no matter what. He's my Lord. I think there's a world out there that's dying to see that in a church. And that picture of Peter is just precious. And he's going to be with Jesus, and he is. He gets on shore, and then that's when Jesus invites them to have breakfast. And in Peter style, he goes and he gets the 153 fish. He gets this net of fish. Now, I'm thinking if they're large fish, if 153 fish, if they're 2 or 3 pounds each, this is no lightweight duty. This guy's going out grabbing this net by himself and hauling it to shore. They're going to have some fish, okay? And there's 153 large fish. Of course, it's a fish story. You don't have small fish in the fish story, right? But 153 large fish. They prepare the meal. None of them at this time dared to ask Jesus who he was. He hasn't said, I'm Jesus. He hasn't said anything about his identity. And some people kind of like, well, why is that? Did he kind of not look the same? And this is the third appearance after the resurrection. Have you ever gone into a place, seen somebody you thought you knew, but it was out of context? They weren't where they normally are? And you're like, I think that's, but you weren't bold enough to go, hey, Sam, and be wrong, right? I think that's kind of what's going on here. Because in the next phrase after that, it says they knew it was Jesus. And it would become abundantly clear in just a moment that it's Jesus, okay? So they don't dare, but they partake of this meal together, and then after the meal, this is where it gets to the heart of discipleship. After they have breakfast together and after they finish eating, Jesus now turns his attention to Simon Peter. And he says to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And of course, we know Peter's response, Lord, you know that I love you. And here is really, I think, the heart of discipleship. I've titled the message, The Disciples' First Love. Because the disciples' first love always is to be Jesus. And this isn't a question just for Peter. This is a question for every single one of us who has a faith in Jesus Christ. Peter, do you love me? But then he says, do you love me more than these? And there's a lot of questions there as to what Jesus might have been referring to when he said, and these. My take on it is he's referring to the fish. Do you love me more than these? Because the fish are counted. There's 153 of them. We number the things that matter to us, right? How many children do you have? Any guess on that, right? You know how many children you have. How many working days before you retire? I know there's one person in our midst who knows that number to this morning. It's important to them. It matters. When Oren, our grandson, was born, he weighed 6 pounds and 2 ounces. He was almost a month early, or right about a month early. And that matters. He dropped to 5'7", and by the time we left was up to 5'11". So things were heading in the right direction. But those things matter, right? There are others that say, no, he's speaking of the disciples here. And that's a valid point. It very well could be that he's speaking about all the other disciples. But really, it doesn't matter. What he's saying with Jesus, the point is there someone in your life that you love more than me? Because as a follower of Jesus, you cannot have anything in your life that you love more than him. Whether it's a thing, this goes back to what Matt talked about last week, that anything where is our love? Because everything in our life will reflect what we love. And Jesus says here, and he's making this very clear to Peter, that the requirement or the one credential of being a follower of him is that you love him. And 3 times he states this. 3 times are the qualification. The first, second, and third qualification of being a disciple of Jesus Christ. Do you love me? And then he says, feed my sheep. See, before you can do any ministry, before you can do anything that God wants you to accomplish, it needs to start with a love for him. And then we're able to do what he calls us and enables us to do. And I would say, as on a practical level, as disciples, this is everything in our life. If you are loving Jesus as he calls you to, and by the way, just an addition, I looked down at the notes, 3 times we know Peter denied Jesus. And now Jesus gives him 3 opportunities to profess his love, to restore him. But when you and I, and when us as followers of Jesus who have a faith in him, we put our love for Jesus first above everything. That is above our family. That is above our children. That is above our culture, our work. That is above ourselves. Then he begins to work and order all of the rest under the umbrella of that love. And what I mean by that is, if you love Jesus first, it will impact your marriage. It will impact every single relationship in your life. As a parent, it will impact your parenting. And as a child, it will impact your relationship with your parent. Right? Because we know it as well is. Honor your mother and father, love them. In your workplace, it will impact your relationship with those you work with. In your own attitude, and I think Matt brought this out. Humility and meekness. It begins with a love for him. And it's after that Jesus says, well, feed my sheep. And that kind of hits on what the basics, going back to the word, making that important in your life. Because we need to be fed. It will impact your worship. It will impact your church. It will impact every aspect of your life. So, discipleship, really, the core of it, in making disciples, begins and almost ends with loving Jesus. There's at least one more message. I might share one more snapshot of Peter before we're done. We're almost closed with this, series of making disciples. But when we close the series, I don't want us to stop making disciples. I have hammered on this over and over again so that when you close your eyes at night or so when you go like this, you still hear, make disciples. Because we're never to stop making disciples. That's what the church on earth is here for, to help people come to follow Jesus Christ, to be saved for eternity. You want to know what will transform the world? Jesus will. And he's put you and I here to do this work, and we can't be mum. We need to be actively touching people's lives with the good news of Jesus Christ, both in word and deed, so that this world can have the opportunity to come to faith in Jesus Christ and be transformed. It's where every single one of us are at, and we're not all, we are, as Nate said, we're progressing in our relationship, or he is continuing to do that which he began in us, which he promised he would do until the day of completion, till we're with him. But that's why we're here. We got an incredible mission, and we can't do it without him. But it begins with your love for him. So with that, we're going to share communion. Sorry, it's gone a little longer than I was hoping. But the communion table, I think, is perfect timing today. Always.